Madama Butterfly is an opera in 3 acts composed by the Italian Giacomo Puccini, who was inspired by a play from David Velasco. The opera premiered in Milan in 1904 and is one of the most frequently performed operas. It explains the tragic history of a U.S. naval officer, Pinkerton, who married for convenience a 15-year-old Japanese girl called Chocho-san, a Japanese word meaning Lady Butterfly. He rents a house on a hill in Nagasaki for him and his very young wife, but he decides to return to America, leaving her in charge of their common son. It is not after 3 years that Pinkerton comes again to Japan, but accompanied with his new American wife, Kate, with the only purpose to take his son. In consequence, when Butterfly realized the real aim of his return, she decided to kill herself. Regarding its historical context, Madama Butterfly was conceived during the early years of the 20th century, at the core of the Japanese phenomenon, defined as the catchment and reception of Japan in Western culture. Years before, a series of new treaty obligations forced Japan to start trading with Europe and America, putting an end to 200 years of national isolation and increasing cultural contacts. By 1852, Japanese art collections dominated Western museums. Finally, in 1868, with the Meiji Restoration, there was a further stimulus to trade with the West. Thus, Madame Butterfly was a product of the Japanese period and occupies a special place in its West cultural fusion. As a result, it is one of the very few Western operas with an Asian protagonist and to include Asian melodies.
The colonization of Asia by the empires in Europe implied an explicit cultural exchange. Europeans believed that not only they were militarily superior, but culturally superior as well. The colonizing power saw the people in Asia as not civilized and wanted to impose their ways in order to civilize them. There was happening a process of cultural assimilation and cultural homogenization, with the dominant powers taking away from the mainstream the local culture and introducing their own, which they believed to be superior. Interestingly, during the colonial period, at the same time that Europeans were imposing their traditions, they were also obsessing about Asia's products, wanting to import, for example, its silks and its ceramics.
In order to explore how the concepts of Orientalism are reflected in Madame Butterfly, we will now proceed to analyze this opera with the following hypothesis in mind. Western imperialism stereotyped, dehumanized, and tried to dominate the East through operas such as Madame Butterfly.
Madame Butterfly would be considered an Orientalist opera because although on the surface it might seem to resonate with innocence and beauty, in fact it conveys the new Western fascination for Japan in the 19th century. This opera is Orientalist not only by means of intricate linguistic, but also by a musical fusion. The opera reflects the existence of temporary wives in Japan, with a typical white man, represented by Pinkerton, drawn by the passionate and delicate Madame Butterfly, who mimics the West, renouncing to her religion and traditions and becoming an icon displayed for the enjoyment of men. In this way, the other is embodied in the figure of Butterfly, in contraposition to the male gaze of Pinkerton, representing the dominant West and the self.
So, as we have previously explained, we can see Orientalist elements in Madame Butterfly. This opera, as many other European ones, depicts the Orient in a way that contains many stereotypes of its culture and inhabitants. European opera authors have created representations of the Orient based on generalizations and prejudices, seeing it as something exotic and, even in some cases, as a way of dealing with controversial issues. Furthermore, through this portrayal of the Orient, stereotypes are transmitted to the public, making it even more difficult to put an end to these prejudices. In short, not only do European operas create misleading images of the Orient, but they also perpetuate the Western domination over these places. On the other hand, the creators of opera learned about the Orient thanks to the process of globalization. During the 18th century, many Europeans traveled to the Orient and brought back home items that were studied and admired. There were also translations of important literary works that, together with the accounts of those who traveled there, influenced European operas. However, this increase of information about the Orient also contributed to a rise of Orientalism and stereotypes. In the 19th century, authors used religions, cultures, and arts of the Orient as a way of criticizing their own civilization in contrast with an ethical East. Finally, the East was during the 20th century a source of inspiration to renew the opera. To sum up, we can say that globalization allowed European opera authors to acquire knowledge about the East.
It is important to acknowledge the existence of this cultural imperialism when analyzing the opera. Cultural imperialism refers to the imposition of various aspects of one's culture to another community, being the one that imposes its culture in a dominant position. Cultural imperialism can also be seen as a cultural legacy of colonialism, or other ways, apart from military control, that the West had to secure their hegemony. Having cultural hegemony enabled the ruling powers to silence dissident voices and to weaken the opposition through the imposition of Western opinions. Thus, seeing colonialism from the standpoint of cultural imperialism does not overemphasize the power of knowledge, but rather complements the military power and helps to further understand the colonial rule.
In Madame Butterfly, it can be seen how the protagonist abandons her traditions and adopts the culture of her American husband, imitating the way in which Western women dressed and idolatrizing the culture. Moreover, the creation of operas in which the East is portrayed under the views of Europeans contributed to the continuation of Western hegemony. The way Madame Butterfly is characterized with the stereotype of this submissive Asian woman does nothing but justify and perpetuate exploitation and oppression of Asian people.
In order to try to answer our hypothesis, I set out to analyze the opera a bit in order to know to what extent the West deshumanizes and stereotypes the East in this Puccini's opera. First of all, we have to talk about the main character, who gives name to the entire opera, Chiu-Chiu-san, better known as Madame Butterfly. She's a 15-year-old geisha who falls deeply in love with a lieutenant in the US Navy named Pinkerton. However, Pinkerton only wants a temporary marriage and abandons the geisha, who will wait, hopefully, and with a child for his return. Therefore, Madame Butterfly is portraying the stereotypical model of an Asian woman. Geisha, passive, silent. The first question that people have been asked is, was her story entirely fictional, given that temporary wives were a sad reality in Japanese treaty ports at the end of the 19th century? Therefore, the story of Madame Butterfly seems to have rapidly transformed itself into an archetypical myth of the encounter between Japan and the West. However, at no point in the opera is there an attempt to represent this reality as something negative. On the contrary, it is represented as the beautiful within the exotic. Therefore, I quote Sandra Line, Far East Asian romances modeled on Puccini's opera Madame Butterfly as sexist and racist products of an oppressive Orientalist imagination. Besides, by humanizing the imperialist man, the opera also imbued the role of Western men in Asia, viewed by middle and upper classes audiences with far more noble characteristics. For instance, we can talk about a quote in the beginning of the opera where Madame Butterfly's mother and friends see Pinkerton for the first time and they are impressed that the man is very handsome and they say, "He seems like a king to me." Another example of this Asianness as an object to be looked at is the Un bel divendremo, the most known aria of the opera. The beloved aria's moment of transcendence comes exactly when Chiu-Chiu-san stops singing. Silence is the condition of her humanity. The orchestra finishes the number without her. In conclusion, this opera shows how an Asian woman sacrificed her fake husband, her child, and her life for the love of a Westerner. West wins over East, and men wins over women. Therefore, yes, Western imperialism stereotyped, dehumanized, and tried to dominate the East in Madame Butterfly.
Said's work clearly demonstrates how the Western literacy and arts otherized, so to speak, non-Western peoples according to Western cultural canons, thereby misrepresenting the Orient. In Said's words, the Orient was almost a European invention, and had been since antiquity a place of romance, exotic beings, haunting memories, and landscapes. Understanding this opposition between the self and the other proves to be a very useful model for historical analysis, since it helps account for the collective imagination that the West had on Eastern people and their culture, as well as its consequences. Madame Butterfly, as we've seen, is a clear example of this. The West constructed an image of the Orient that was self-reinforced through works such as travelogues, historical accounts, official archives, and, why not, novels, paintings, and operas. This relationship of power and production of knowledge is then essential to understanding how Europe imposed colonial domination on Asia and elsewhere. This topic, even if it's in a historical context, is still relevant today. Colonial power dynamics constructed by the West and the creation of the other as something exotic have important consequences in the contemporary society. For instance, cultural appropriation of a minority by a dominant culture is brought about by Westerns who feel entitled to take something from another culture, reshape it to their taste, and make it theirs. Does this sound familiar? Other more extreme consequences are, for example, the fetishization of Asian people originated by this notion of exoticism. These are headlines of a prostitution ring taken down in 2017, which was based in Bellevue for American men who paid to have sex with young Korean girls. The construction of the Orient is still present today in the entertainment industry, maybe not through operas, but through Hollywood films and biased images whose depiction of the Orient still reinforces this notion of otherness created over 3 centuries ago.